Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Adjust my camera a little bit, as usual. Hope you're all doing well. It is Tuesday, 7 p.m. on the 21st of July. We have quite a bit to cover tonight. As we said in our Sunday live stream, The Coming Week was the title of that live stream. There was a great deal that was going to unfold this week, geopolitically speaking, economically speaking, pick your subject. Tonight, we are entitling this live stream, The Widening War. So this is how we're opening the week. It is Tuesday, but since yesterday and the announcement by the IRGC in Iran, and by way of the IRGC, the Houthis in Yemen, of a moratorium, a sanctioning, a blockading, again, pick your term, of the strait at the southern end of the Red Sea, where Yemen is located. I'm sure you all know that. This is the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. So this is characterized as a choke point, as is the better known Strait of Hormuz. The third choke point, of course, is at the north end of the Red Sea, and that is the Suez Canal. Tonight, what I'd like to focus on is the Red Sea and the consequences of this action, which is nothing more than really a press release, but a military action, a threat against Saudi Arabia. So we are focusing on Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb. I'd like to open tonight with a thought experiment, as we often do here. But before I get right into that, just a quick programming note. Most of you already know, if you listen to Sunday's live stream, that we have slightly modified our broadcasting schedule. Typically, we would provide a live stream on Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, followed up on Tuesday, and then Thursday. We are moving Sunday to Monday, so we are beginning next week on Monday with a live stream on Monday. There will be no live stream on Saturday or Sunday. So it will be a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule, 7 p.m. Eastern. Okay, so our thought experiment. I jotted down just a couple of quick lines that I'd like to read to you. As we typically do in these live streams, I try to provide you with what I call the punchline right up front, and then we backfill with evidence, with resources, with sources, with statements and reports. So the real punchline for today is the Islamic resistance in Iraq, not Iran. The Islamic resistance in Iraq will join forces with the IRGC in the initial near-term occupation of both Kuwait and Bahrain. Saudi Arabia will attempt to protect itself from both the United States and Israel by siding with Iran in order to prevent the Houthis in Yemen from destroying their Saudi Arabian primary Red Sea oil terminals, which are located in the port city of Yanbu in the Red Sea, which features the massive King Fahd industrial port of Yanbu and the Yanbu South Terminal. The Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, these are 6 Arab nations that are part of a political and economic union. This is what makes up the Persian Gulf, in addition to Iran. Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, also pronounced Qatar, as in the musical instrument, a guitar, that's the proper pronunciation, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Here's my real thought experiment. In addition to the Islamic resistance in Iraq, joining forces with the IRGC of Iran, and Saudi Arabia joining forces with essentially both Iraq and Iran, in opposition to both the United States and Israel, in order to protect the Saudi Arabian infrastructure located in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. It's my estimation that all 6 of these countries, again, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, will follow suit, and probably follow in quick succession, turning away from the United States and certainly turning away from Israel. Why would they do this? Number one, it's to protect themselves insofar as the threats by Iran to destroy all of the infrastructure in these 6 states in the Gulf Cooperation Council, to protect their infrastructure. Notably, in addition to oil and natural gas, is of course water in the form of desalination plants. If they lose their water, there will be a mass exodus of the populations of these countries out of the Persian Gulf. In order to protect themselves, they are joining forces with Iran. The United States, in virtually every country, has military bases. The United States promised to defend the Gulf Cooperation Council from attacks by anyone, including Iran. The United States has failed to do so. Those bases are now non-operational because they've been attacked by Iran. Therefore, there's no real reason for these states to pledge their allegiance to the United States, to depend upon the United States in any form. They are desperate to save their people, to save their water, to save their economy by saving their oil and natural gas industries, which include fertilizers and so forth. So this is really a tipping point, beginning with Saudi Arabia now receiving this declaration, not a shot fired, but a declaration in the form of a press release by the Houthis, which effectively makes Saudi Arabia's King Fahd industrial port, Yanbu, a target. The declaration has already, since yesterday's announcement, shut down the loading of oil tankers, the movement of oil tankers from the port, from Yanbu, and now what is seldom ever discussed, but should be right up front, is the refusal by insurance companies, maritime insurance companies, to provide maritime insurance to any ships in the Red Sea, much less large, very large crude oil carriers loading and leaving the port of Yanbu. Without insurance, nothing moves. This should get a lot more attention from the media, but it doesn't. They talk about the price of oil, the cutting off of the shipping of oil, the lack of oil, and so forth. But they don't talk about the insurance that is necessary. And insurance is provided or withdrawn, more specifically withdrawn, by a mere threat. There does not need to be a shot across the bow. There does not need to be an actual attack on a ship. Insurance companies have learned from the Strait of Hormuz that with respect to the Bab al-Mandeb, they're just not going to offer insurance. Given all of these together, and as you can appreciate, the leaders of these countries, the leaders of the businesses in these countries, the population within these countries, within the Gulf Cooperation Council, they want to do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Personally, physically, infrastructure, business, natural resources, etc. They don't want to lose their countries. They don't want to lose their sovereignty. They turn to the United States for that protection. Obviously, that has failed. They know that in their mind, the clear and present danger is not Iran or Iraq. In fact, they are, as I said, beginning to view those two countries and their people as allies, while at the same time understanding that Israel is the true threat to the Gulf Cooperation Council, as well as Iraq and Iran. In other words, there will be no peace as long as Israel continues this war. The war is ramping up. Today, Netanyahu called an emergency security council meeting. They met for 5.5 hours. To cut to the chase, the real worry is that Israel is going to go nuclear. Their Samson option. They've been heavily hit, heavily destroyed, tremendous losses. The United States has already been making noise about not supporting Israel, while at the same time saying that they are going to hit Iran even harder this week than they have ever been hit. Bombing campaigns. At the same time, again, we have Netanyahu and Trump appearing to distance themselves. Trump saying certain derogatory things about Israel, about Netanyahu, about Israel's plans to continue the war, while at the same time Trump saying his own escalatory statements about increasing the bombing against Iran. The point I want to drive home here between Netanyahu and Trump is that it appears that the two leaders are trying to craft the appearance of distancing themselves for the purpose of providing the United States with the opportunity of plausible deniability should Netanyahu and his group go forward with using tactical nuclear weapons against Iran. Now, this would include Syria, specifically Damascus. I won't get into that tangent in this discussion, but I think you can appreciate that if the U.S. does not want to become involved in a nuclear strike, preemptive strike against Iran, they need to separate themselves from Israel and Israel's greater Israel agenda. This is not being done in an adversarial way between Trump and Netanyahu. This is, in fact, the plan, the cooperation. It is to provide that plausible deniability for the U.S., which in turn provides the freedom of movement, the freedom of action on the part of Netanyahu and Israel to act independently, to use those nuclear weapons. So let's look at the two countries in terms of their ability to wage war. And again, I'll keep this very succinct. We've heard a lot through the media, even mainstream, that the United States stockpile of missiles, of weapons systems, offensive and anti-missile defensive systems, are severely depleted. The United States has a very limited capacity to wage war. Even though Trump says we're going to deliver, heavier blows to Iran than has been done since the 28th of February, the beginning of this war. Well, the United States really does not have the capacity to wage a major conflict. The same holds true for Israel. Israel, as you can appreciate, has been wholly dependent upon the United States financially, economically, militarily, and politically for its very existence. So if there is this plausible deniability scenario and the freedom of movement on the part of Israel materializes, and Israel then utilizes what they do have left in their stockpile, which are tactical nukes. Now, my own personal estimation in terms of numbers of nuclear warheads in the stockpile of Israel is somewhere between 310 and 350 individual nuclear warheads. They have the delivery platforms. They would not be able, and nor do I think they would, from a practical standpoint, attempt to launch 350 warheads. It's not necessary, but they have fixed ground launch facilities, they have mobile ground launch facilities, and they have 4 submarine launch platforms. They certainly have the capability of launching a large number of tactical nukes against Iran. Neither the United States nor Israel, even if they were combining their forces, have the stockpile of armaments to defeat Iran. Going back to the Gulf Cooperation Council, if I understand this from a layman perspective, just an observer from the outside, certainly the militaries, the leadership of the Gulf Cooperation Council understand the situation that the U.S. and Israel find themselves in. They cannot, again, depend on the U.S. to defend them. At the same time, they are directly threatened by Israel because they are in the greater Israel agenda. Each of those countries I listed, each of those 6 countries, Arab countries, are targets in this greater Israel agenda. So who can they depend upon to protect them, protect their people, their infrastructure, their economies, their sovereignty? If not the U.S., and in their back door, Israel is their clear and present danger. They turn to their present enemy and form an alliance. Now, just in the last couple of days, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, acting in cooperation with Iran, have struck Kuwait, port facilities, and a U.S. military base in Kuwait and in Bahrain. These attacks are what led me to this thought experiment, to this proposed scenario of this seeking an alliance with Iran by the Gulf Cooperation Council. Logically, it makes sense. Why would you depend on a country like the United States, who has proven itself to be unreliable in many respects. And you're under the threat from Iran itself to have your entire country wiped out and your people dispersed, forced migration, fleeing their countries. Why not turn to that enemy and try to make peace? Now, doing so openly would then make the United States and obviously Israel an enemy. I can fully appreciate that this sounds counterintuitive, sounds very implausible, but like the Samson option with Israel, the use of nukes against their enemies, sounds counterintuitive, sounds implausible, because to use nukes against anyone, of course, Israel would then be struck by nukes as well. And yet, it's a well-known option. It appears that this is what Netanyahu and his security leaders are discussing because they know they don't have the ability to go it alone. And they know that the United States is not equipped to be able to help Israel, even if they did not have this plausible deniability scenario in place. The two of them are losing, and losing heavily. This is the setup for the Samson option. So think of the Samson option with Israel as applied to the Gulf Cooperation Council, not that they have nukes, but it's almost a nuclear move on their part against Israel and the United States by joining forces with the enemy, going over to the other side. When we look at it from the standpoint of an existential threat made by Iran against the Gulf Cooperation Council, it makes sense that they would essentially surrender to their enemy, to wave the white flag so they can live another day. That's the reason you surrender, is to live another day and maybe down the road fight another day. So I offer that scenario, that thought experiment to you just to make note of, to give it some thought, to perhaps listen for any mention of such an action on the part of the Gulf Cooperation Council. But when we look at Iraq through the Islamic resistance, attacking members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, specifically attacking U.S. forces, but also the infrastructure, oil infrastructure in Kuwait and Bahrain, that really prompts these countries to say, it's time to surrender. We don't want to lose our countries. This is our version of the Samson option, is to wave the white flag. I think that is very plausible. So if we pull back from the Persian Gulf and we look at the Red Sea itself and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait and the declaration by the Houthis, what's the impact globally already? We have seen the price of oil, and again, these are futures prices, but Brent, North Sea crude, West Texas Intermediate, and others creep up into the low $80, even in some cases, some fields, as high as $90 briefly today, $80 to $90 per barrel. Now that's not the price at delivery, that's significantly higher, but it's a bellwether, it's a gauge. Well, the markets have not really, in terms of pricing, really responded the way they should be responding, which is to respond upwards in the price of a barrel of oil. Because with simply a press release, a declaration to the world by the Houthis, insurance has been withdrawn. Nothing is moving. This was the plan B to the Strait of Hormuz. About 4.4 million barrels of crude oil per day were being delivered to Yanbu to load cargo tankers for shipment to the world. That has now stopped. Plan B is off the table. Markets should be panicking right now. As I said in our Sunday live stream, we need to watch this week. And I pointed out on Sunday that the Bab al-Mandeb was going to be the first thing to fall, the first impact, and that has proven to be the case. Now, the price of oil is one thing, but as I have cautioned listeners here to our live streams, it's not about price, it's about availability. It's about supply. Now, there's an interesting phenomenon. It doesn't matter what the price of gasoline at the pump is. Is there any gasoline at the pump? That's what I'm saying. But the interesting phenomenon is that as oil goes higher and higher, as it will this week, as the realization of this declaration and the word about insurance finally begins to impact the markets, oil begins to price itself out of the marketplace. Something else that is not openly, not frequently enough discussed is demand for supply. If you price the product so high that the customers, the demand, can no longer afford to buy the product, then that demand ceases to exist. Demand actually goes down because the businesses close. Oil going above $100 a barrel will have a dramatic impact on demand. Again, this sounds counterintuitive, but when you look at it, you examine it, it makes sense. If businesses can no longer afford the energy that is needed to keep their doors open, then they close their doors. Closing their doors means their demand in the form of their business disappears. You multiply that throughout a region, multiple countries, a region, an area of the world where businesses just evaporate. Demand goes down. When demand goes down, and this is still near term, but a little further down the road, as demand decreases, that will have an effect insofar as pulling down the price of oil. But this is down the road. It's not something to put your hopes on. We understand supply and demand. If demand goes up and supply remains constant, then the price goes up. If supply comes down and demand comes down, then both come down. The demand comes down, that pulls the price down. It's no longer supply and demand in Economics 101. Economics has changed. Because of the dependency upon oil for everything, as you get to the finer examination of oil, businesses, countries, individuals dependent upon oil and very price sensitive to what oil is available, when we are priced out of the market, we go away. The demand goes away. If there's not sufficient demand to justify the price, the refiners, the holder of the oil, the suppliers of oil begin to discount the price, but there's a fixed point where they have to stop that discounting, but they begin to try to stimulate demand again, maybe even help businesses open their doors again by lowering the cost of energy. So there can be a little bit of a rebound on the demand side as price begins to become discounted to make oil more attractive, to make oil more affordable. But refiners, so you have oil exploration, speculation, drilling, pumping, transportation, refining, transportation again, and then finally the retail selling. Those all have costs that must be covered. In the United States, it's typically quoted in terms of the price per barrel at about $50 to $55 per barrel of oil, which is the lower threshold at which oil can be brought down in the marketplace. Anything below the threshold, the refiners stop refining because it would cost them money to refine. And then that has a downstream effect all the way back to exploration. So the ripple effect at, let's say, $50 a barrel is the bottom of that discounting process to try to bring back demand. But here's the other big point to bear in mind. The damage has been done. The damage has been done to demand such that, in my humble opinion, very little recovery will be experienced on the demand side. I'm speaking globally. That the world has already, with the Strait of Hormuz, reached the point of no return. We've heard of timelines for recovery of already damaged infrastructure in the Persian Gulf of, in a best case scenario, depending on the infrastructure, but a year, best case, before that, whatever it was, let's say it's a pumping plant, would come back online. We hear about permanent damage and loss of supply capacity from oil wells that are suddenly shut down, or if they're directly attacked, kinetically damaged and shut down, that there's a permanent 15 to 30% permanent future loss of supply from that well because of the damage. There are geological reasons for that damage and that sustained damage that cannot be recovered. But even in the best case, if we're talking about infrastructure that could be repaired and brought back online in a year's time, a year is a year. Now, much more, the majority of what has been damaged is going to take 5 to 10 years to recover. But if we focus on 1 year for the world, can the world survive economically? Survive for a year? Because the other product that you've heard a lot about is fertilizer coming out of the Persian Gulf and sulfur. So when these products, you can talk about aluminum, the impact on production of aluminum, the impact on production of computer chips because of a lack of helium, the healthcare industry, lack of helium, et cetera, et cetera. These are all downstream effects that are damage to infrastructure that if they persist in the lack of those products, let's focus on fertilizer, for 1 year, can the world, can the population survive? Literally, I'm talking life and death, existential. Can the global population survive with a dramatic reduction in the availability? Forget about the cost of it. just the availability of fertilizer, because there are other sources, but they're smaller sources that cannot meet the present demand nor future demand. We already have countries that have been dramatically impacted in their current production of food, and then going forward in the northern hemisphere, for example, to the harvest season this year, and then the inability for the following year to produce anything. In the United States and other countries, we already have farmers that have said, we cannot at any price get our hands on fertilizer, so we are not planting. How long can the population survive? We're talking global famine. The world does not have a year. We have already, with the Strait of Hormuz, crossed the point of no return. There is no recovery in terms of food. There is no recovery for the economy. We are moving into the destruction of the present economic system, the paradigm. There's a couple of behind-the-scenes principal reasons why the United States and Israel preemptively on the 28th of February started this war against Iran. I mentioned a few live streams ago that it is indirectly, this is an attack, a preemptive attack on China. Iran becomes effectively the proxy for an attack on China. How I get there is because by denying the flow of oil and other products to China that China has enjoyed at discount prices coming from Iran, when you cut off the flow, and yes, there's been a trickle, we understand that, but when you cut off China and in a major way impact their economy, doesn't matter that they have 1.5 billion barrels of crude oil in their strategic petroleum reserve, which they've been sharing with their neighboring countries in order to sustain their economies, their demand for the products that China manufactures to then support the Chinese economy. When you cut off a substantial portion of the oil and other products reaching China from Iran, that's an attack on China. That was one of the main reasons. The other reason for Israel and the U.S. to attack Iran was to obtain the natural resources. Wars are typically fought over resources. This one is no different. The interests in Israel are for greater Israel, the acquisition of the territory. The goal for the United States was access to the oil. Same reason we went into Iraq. Again, there are multiple reasons with Iraq, but it was natural resources. Same thing with Iran. This is why we built all these bases in the Persian Gulf, was to protect the oil. That's why we went into Kuwait. Desert Storm, the oil wells. Now, behind all of this, U.S. and Israel, is the military-industrial complex. Now, we've all heard that label, but understand that this is profiteering. These are arms dealers. Pick your industrial business, making arms, small businesses all the way to the major manufacturers. Doesn't matter what country, but I'm focusing on the United States and Israel. Their military-industrial complex drives their economies. If I'm focused on the U.S., because I live in the U.S., our economy is a war-based economy. It pretty much always has been. So it's for the purpose of a select few financially profiting from war. That drives the military-industrial complex as a machine to produce those profits, and additional profits gained by controlling resources like oil. The root of all evil is the love of money. That's what's playing out right now. So the global economy has reached the point of no return. Within a few days of the start of this war, the world had already reached the point of no return. And look at how far down the road we are now. There is no recovery. This global economy, through these mechanisms of profiteering, acquisition of resources, from a bigger picture perspective, was for a global economic reset. We've all heard of the reset. The reset began on the 28th of February. The world just doesn't realize it. All of what I've laid out to you so far already here tonight are the motivations, the mechanisms of that process, that machinery of the reset. Already the dollar, prior to the start of the war, was going through and experiencing a de-dollarization process. We've all heard of BRICS. We understand BRICS. I have said for years that there will be a single global currency in the new economy. Following the reset, it will be the Chinese yuan, a stable coin backed by physical gold in China. The United States profiteers who enjoy the profits of the US dollar being the reserve currency for the world, the petrodollar currency, the currency used to settle cross-border trade, have enjoyed the profits from the dollar being the reserve currency. They, by trying to attack China's economy by way of Iran, we're trying to stem the flow, stem the movement of de-dollarization, trying to preserve their position with the dollar. But they're in the minority. The majority of those that are pulling the strings want the dollar to go away and be replaced by a digital cryptocurrency. They want a new economy, because getting to the new economy means elimination of the present economy. When you destroy the present economy, you zero out on the bank ledger. You zero out all the debts. This is why countries have been spending as they have been for so many years. Why governmental leaders and even banking and financial leaders are not concerned about debt. They're not concerned about the cost of the military-industrial complex. They're not concerned about the profiteering going on, because they knew that eventually the books would be wiped clean with a financial reset. We are at the point of no return. The reset is well underway. Now, there's a defining moment that I'm going to share with you that my audience here has heard me say for many years, really since 2020, that I'll share with you in just a moment. But bear in mind that all of these kinetic war events and the widening war. Widening in the form of looking at Kuwait and Bahrain, moving beyond the borders of Iran, drawing in Iraq, the widening war, moving into Syria, moving into Yemen, and with the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, because there will be no insurance for the cargo ships, to utilize the Red Sea in its entirety, effectively that shuts down the Suez Canal, the choke point, the third one. That will have a huge financial impact on Egypt. And Egypt will blame Israel and attack Israel, and Israel knows that. But all of these events lead to the financial reset. Those that love money, they know the debts that have been accrued can never be repaid. Doesn't matter what country. The global debt-based economy is to be eliminated. And it will be a new economy and a new one world government with a one world leader and a single cryptocurrency as the global currency. Unfortunately, a lot of damage will take place during this ongoing, already functioning reset. So for nearly 6 years, I've been talking about what I have referred to as the flipping of the switch scenario. This is the immediate shutting down of the entire global internet and World Wide Web, as if you were flipping a light switch. Let me share with you a current event. Amazon operates 2 data centers, Amazon Web Services, AWS. One is in Bahrain, and the other is the United Arab Emirate region. Iranian state media claimed that its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, attacked and destroyed Amazon Web Services data infrastructure in Bahrain using cruise missiles. Additionally, previous strikes in March of 2026 deliberately targeted and damaged AWS data centers in the United Arab Emirates as well as Bahrain. Now, in addition to that, going back nearly 2 months ago, Iran, the IRGC, threatened to cut undersea fiber optic internet cables, 4 cables, that run briefly in short distance through territorial waters of Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, it just came out yesterday by way of the Houthis at the Bab al-Mandeb Strait that there are at least 2, possibly 4, still trying to confirm the numbers, but at least 2 fiber optic internet undersea cables. These are laid on the seabed or in shallow trenches that are usually about 2 meters in depth. Then they're backfilled with the seabed material, but nonetheless threatening to cut those cables. Now, those cables handle data traffic between Europe and the Middle East, run right down the Red Sea, just like the cables run through the Strait of Hormuz. The internet is very fragile. It would not take much to damage the internet. Yes, there are workarounds like Amazon rerouted data traffic from Bahrain to Spain, to Europe, to Ireland. But workarounds have a limited capacity, and customers that use data centers, that have data that is stored in those data centers, because they are storage facilities, don't like the idea of their data being threatened, being destroyed, or that data preemptively prior to an attack, that data being transferred to another country, to another data center. Again, there are limited capacities to data centers, so there is a triaging of who gets their data protected. The flipping of the switch, as I sort of envision it, if you want to use that word, is that there will be an attack, a simultaneous attack in multiple locations to things like data centers and undersea data transmission cables. Upwards of 90% of the global internet traffic flows through fiber optic undersea cables. 90%. And essentially, they are unprotected. It's only when they rise from the seabed and come up the shoreline to a terminal, a building, typically a concrete bunker type structure, where the seabed cable connects to a land cable system. That makes them vulnerable. So what I'm expecting is that there will be a flipping of the switch, a sudden shutting down of the global internet. When that occurs, all data, financial data specifically, I don't mean all as in all data, but financial data, call it the banking system if you want, goes to zero. You see, the war, whatever it is, whoever attacked the cables can be blamed. The internet going down can be blamed, rather than individual governments and individual leaders of governments, individual tech leaders, individual banking sector leaders, private sector investment leaders, and so forth. They don't want to be blamed. They don't want to be physically threatened with their lives. So the blame is shifted to the war, to an attack, to a destruction of the fiber optic cables. And therefore, you lose all records of your debts. Remember Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum in June of 2020 said, we will have a financial reset. All of your debts will be eliminated. And you will own nothing, but you will be happy for it. Well, here's the other side of that coin. In a debt-based global economy, there are no assets. Assets are derived from debts in a debt-based economy. When the debts go to zero, when the debt-based economy is destroyed, the assets, so too, go to zero. No one's going to be happy about that, despite what Klaus Schwab said. So the purpose is to install a single leader for the world, a dictator, to install a single cryptocurrency. All other cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and the like, will be rendered obsolete and useless. There will be one digital currency for the world. And there will be a new financial system. It will not be the banking system that we know now. It will be BRICS, and their bank, which is the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, which today oversees all of the central banks of all of the countries. The BIS will be the only bank for the new global economy. So I'm sharing this outline with you tonight as we conclude. The world has reached the point of no return. So disavow any notions, any promises, any proclamations by politicians that the infrastructure will be rebuilt, that the oil will flow again, that there will be peace, that the wars will be brought to a swift conclusion, and with peace, we can have oil, we can have energy again. We can forestall a global famine. Those are all lies. That is all misdirection. These are the facts as I see them, for whatever that's worth. But I feel that it is my responsibility to share this with you so that you can at least consider these words, consider these thoughts, consider these possibilities and thought experiments. And as we often say here, prudently prepare. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. God bless you. And good night.